everyone! Today we're going to be going over Mentor 7 question 1 together. So this question is our Pokemon Selector question, and it has to deal with abstract data types. Let's go ahead and start by just reading through the problem together. So this problem says, the following is an abstract data type that represents Pokemon. Each Pokemon keeps track of its name, type, and friends. Given our provided constructor, fill out the selectors. Okay, so just reading through our question, we know that we're going to be provided with a constructor statement. We're going to have this constructor function that is what is going to create these Pokemon instances. And our job is to create and define the selector functions that you can then use on these Pokemon instances. Okay, let's go ahead and start by reading through the constructor so we have a better idea of one, what the constructor is creating and what is going on there, and two, what we're going to have to do in our selector functions. Okay, so let's go ahead and start by reading through this constructor statement. So this constructor is Pokemon, and when we create an instance of a Pokemon, we have 3 attributes we have to put into this constructor, which is our name, our Pokemon type, and our friends. Okay, as of right now, we're not sure what those attributes are, whether they're strings or numbers or lists. So let's go ahead and keep reading through our constructor so we have a better idea of what it is we're putting into our constructor. Okay, so we continue on and it says constructs a Pokemon with the given attributes. Okay, pretty straightforward. So let's go ahead, and the next thing we see is it's giving us an example of actually constructing a Pokemon. So let's go ahead and go through that so we get an idea of what happens and what attributes we actually need to put into our constructor. Okay, so here we have Cyndaquil, which is the name we're going to be assigning to this Pokemon instance. We can use our selector functions on it, and so that way we can go ahead and keep referring to it. And then on the right, we see that we're actually creating and constructing this Pokemon instance. So on the right, we see we're calling this Pokemon constructor, and the attribute we're putting in, which is our name, here is Cyndaquil. It's a string of Cyndaquil. So that makes sense. The attribute we put in for our name is just a string of the name. Similarly, the next thing that goes in the P type is fire here, which again just means we want to put in a string of the type that our Pokemon is. Okay, and the last part is friends. And we look here, this time it's not a string, but rather a list of strings. This time we have a list that contains Chikorita and Totodile. So we know that the 3 attributes we are putting in for each Pokemon construction is a string of the name, a string of the type, and a list of strings that contains the name of the friends. Okay, I think that all makes a good amount of sense. Let's go ahead and look at the last piece of our constructor. We're going to go ahead and skip the doc test for now, and we'll come back to those in a minute. And we're going to see what is being returned by this constructor statement. So we're going to jump down here, and we see the thing we're returning is a list that contains the name, the type, and the friends of the Pokemon instance we just created. So what this constructor statement is doing is it takes in the 3 attributes, the name, the type, and the friends, and it's returning those 3 attributes in a list. So this Pokemon instance, for instance, when we created Cyndaquil here, after we construct it, what this Cyndaquil is actually pointing to, this instance, is a list that contains the name, the type, and the friends. Okay, I think now that we know that, and now we have all this information, we'll be able to work through and actually figure out what our selector statements are doing. Okay, so let's go ahead and go through now the selector functions that we see in the doc tests. So the first one we have here is pname, and when we call pname on our example Cyndaquil up here, it returns Cyndaquil, which is just the name we inputted, right? Okay, that's pretty straightforward. The next thing we have is the type. Here we see P type, and we call P type on Cyndaquil, it returns fire, which is just the attribute we put in for P type earlier. Okay, pretty straightforward. And then similarly for the last one, we have P friends, and when we call P friends on Cyndaquil, all it did was return the list of friends that we inputted when we constructed our Pokemon instance. Okay, I think all of that helps us make sense, and now we can actually fill out our selector functions. So let's start by looking at pname. So up here, when we called pname on Cyndaquil, we called pname on our Pokemon instance, all it did was return its name. So when we're thinking here, how did we return that? Where did we get this name from? Remember, our Pokemon instance is pointing to this list that contains its 3 attributes. So when we're trying to figure out how to define the selector function on P, we know all we need to do is return the 0th item of the list that P is pointing to. So when we call pname on P, if we want to get the P out, all we have to do is return P of 0. Because all that does is return the 0th item of the list that P is pointing to. Okay, let's go ahead and let's do the next part, the p type. So this is pretty similar to the last one. We know, okay, when we look up here, when we called p type on Cyndaquil, it just gave us the second item of their list. It gave us their p type. So all we want to do when we call p type is return this first item of the list, or the first spot on our list. So all we want to do is return p of 1 this time, because we know the name was the 0th item, and the type was the first item. Okay, I think we can kind of see where this is going for the last part for p friends. If we look here, again, when we called p friends up here, it just returned that list of Chikorita and Totodile. So we know p friends, if we look back up here, we say, okay, that would be the item in the second spot of the list. We had the 0th item was the name, the first item was the type, and the third item points to a list that contains a list of all the friends. So all we have to do here is return p of 2. Okay, and then that solves all of our selector functions. So now whenever we call p name, p type, or p friends, it'll return that item of the list, which is then referring to its name, its type, or its friends.